was a problem before the pandemic.
They're selling death.
Straight fentanyl.
He was laying right there on the bed.
Will they kill you? Sure.
This should not have happened.
You know, and it happened to me.
And he was trying to do CPR on him.
We see it more and more.
She was a good kid, but she tried to self-medicate.
There's nothing else you can do, and they said no.
There's ways you can die.
People who are dying from overdoses of fentanyl.
I can't treat you once you're dead. Killing our children.
We have to, as a community, figure this out.
You've heard of Russian roulette. Slide one bullet into an empty six-shooter, spin the chamber, point it at your head, and pull the trigger. 1 in 6. Not good odds when the cost of losing is so irreversibly final. But those are better odds than you'll get buying a counterfeit painkiller on the streets of Bakersfield if it contains fentanyl. And chances are good it does. The DEA conducted a year-long analysis of seized counterfeit oxycodone and found that 27% of the pills, more than 1 in 4, contained what could have been, should have been, a fatal dose of fentanyl, the synthetic opioid that killed 81,000 Americans last year, including, according to the coroner's office, 125 in Kern County. Today, I'll tell you the story of one of those people. Sometimes it seemed like Tyler Cabral could do anything. Anything. Juggling a golf ball and then whacking it in midair, Tiger Woods style. Swishing a basketball from the roof to the driveway below, backward, blind, and one-handed, Harlem Globetrotters style. Executing a screaming wheelie 100 yards down the street like a motorcycle stuntman. But Tyler Cabral couldn't manage one challenge. He couldn't beat fentanyl. He told his parents he could. He told his girlfriend he could. He may even have told himself he could. But in the end, on September 9th, 2020, fentanyl won. Before that, though, no challenge seemed too great. Golf, soccer, snowboarding, wakeboarding, motocross, especially motocross. He had that fearlessness that separates the guys in the back of the pack from the ones battling for the lead. And he had 150 motocross trophies to prove it.
Just such a natural at anything he did. The kid was just fearless.
That fearlessness got him in trouble, though. He was hurt so often the injuries sometimes overlapped. He broke his jaw riding a scooter when he was 16, and 2 weeks later, having had most but not all of the wiring removed from his mouth, he entered a motocross race. He crashed again, breaking his femur.
All the little brackets cut his mouth when he fell, and he was bleeding. And I was telling the paramedics, because they pretty much know all the families, and and I was like, oh my God, be careful with his jaw. I go, his jaw's broken. And he looked at me and he goes, how do you know? I said, because he just broke it like less than 2 weeks ago.
Later, Tyler broke his wrist, and later still, he dropped his motorcycle when he slipped on fresh tar while doing another wheelie. Here he is, caught on video, shot by a friend just wearing a helmet, t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. The result, epic road rash. More pain, more oxy, deeper dependency. By that time, age 20, he was addicted to painkillers prescribed by various doctors. Once, Cheryl dropped Tyler at a doctor's office, then, without leaving the parking lot, picked up her cell phone.
And I called him and said, look, he's addicted to oxy. You cannot give him anything in that family.
Eventually, his doctors cut him off. So, like many others have done, he turned to the street, where counterfeit oxycodone is inexpensive and abundant, because it's usually not oxycodone at all. It's fentanyl, a cheap synthetic opioid up to 100 times more potent than morphine. Not only is street fentanyl potent and addictive, it's also more dangerous than pharmaceutical opioids because it's not prepared with the same stringent standards used in the industry. Those who work in criminal operations mix the ingredients for counterfeit oxycodone pills with whatever device fits their operation, from commercial-sized mixers to blenders used to make smoothies, all the way down to ordinary household coffee bean grinders. If they don't blend the ingredients thoroughly enough, however, the distribution of fentanyl in the mixture that they press into pills may be inconsistent, and some pills may contain too much. When that happens, invariably, someone dies. That's the bullet in the chamber in this game of Russian roulette. Tyler Cabral had made that transition from legitimately purchased opioids, highly dangerous but at least regulated, to the work of criminal amateurs. Tyler couldn't get himself off that either, and then it got scary. Tyler knew he needed help, but he was in the grip of something powerful, something relentless. In early 2020, he overdosed 3 times within just a few days. Each time, his girlfriend Leah recognized his shallow breathing and ran down the hall to wake up Cheryl and Tyler's father Fred. Each time, they brought him back. Each time, until September 9th, 2020. That night, Leah wasn't there.
I go to bed, I'm laying there, and it was on my mind. It was really heavy on my mind. 1:30, I'm still wide awake. 2:30, I'm still wide awake. At actually 3:30, I'm still wide awake, and I just kind of said out loud, like, God, what are you trying to tell me? Do I need to go check on him? And then I talked myself out of it and said, no, Cheryl, you promised that you wouldn't be a helicopter mom, you know.
The next morning, she opened his bedroom door with a sense of dread.
I walked over so slow, and I just put my hand on his stomach. And I knew, I could just tell. And I just went, Tyler, and I grabbed his face, and as soon as I grabbed his face, I knew it was cold.
Cheryl was too distraught to open the deadbolt for the paramedics, so they kicked in the front door. She listened from the couch downstairs as they tried to save her son.
Is that it? Like, there's nothing else you can do? And they said, no, it was too late.
Even just helping one person a day, guys, you don't understand how that could change the world. If everybody helped one person a day, it adds up.
Tyler Cabral must have felt invincible. At times, he seemed invincible to everyone else, too. That's the awful irony of his story. He shrugged off danger practically every day of his life, but couldn't overcome the shackles of a little pill. Fentanyl did to Tyler Cabral what speed and gravity couldn't. It killed him. He was far from alone. In 2020, fentanyl, by itself and in combination with other drugs, was responsible for at least 2.5 overdose deaths per week across Kern County. That's 10 a month. Why are we telling these stories? Because fentanyl, in the same chemical family as opium and heroin, but manufactured in a lab, is tearing Kern County families apart. Many don't know what's happening until their children are dead. They don't recognize the warning signs, physical and emotional, and they don't grasp the unforgiving finality of a fentanyl overdose. What exactly is fentanyl? Where does it come from? And why is it suddenly so prevalent and so deadly? How does it get into the hands of our children, our siblings, our friends? And what can we do about it? Over the next 4 days, I'll answer those questions. For 17 News, I'm Robert Price.
Fentanyl was a problem before the pandemic.
They're selling death.
Straight fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
He was laying right there on the bed,
Will they kill you? Sure.
This should not have happened.
You know, and it happened to me.
and he was trying to do CPR on him.
We see it more and more.
She was a good kid, but she tried to self-medicate.
There's nothing else you can do, and they said no.
There's ways you can die.
People who are dying from overdoses of fentanyl.
I can't treat you once you're dead. Killing our children.
We have to, as a community, figure this out.
There's a deadly drug on the streets of Bakersfield right now in amazing abundance. It's fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that serves as a powerful painkiller useful in cases such as advanced stage cancer. But it's now been appropriated for the illegal drug trade, and it's killing people. 81,000 in the U.S. last year, including, according to the coroner's office, at least 125 in Kern County. But it's not simply that fentanyl is incredibly toxic, it's that you might not know you're buying fentanyl at all. Illegal drug operations routinely substitute fentanyl for other opiates, such as oxycodone, because it's cheaper and easier to get from foreign suppliers. Wuhan, China, a city we heard so much about last year for another reason, was the world's fentanyl production capital until, ironically, the coronavirus pandemic that also originated in that city disrupted distribution channels. Now, Mexican cartels have largely taken over its manufacture and distribution. And with Big Pharma on the hot seat, facing huge multi-billion-dollar settlements for its role in the opioid crisis, leading to serious restrictions on the availability of prescribed opioids, demand has soared for the even more dangerous illicit versions. Criminal drug makers manufacture realistic-looking oxycodone pills that may contain no oxycodone at all, just fentanyl mixed with other ingredients. Users think they're buying prescription name-brand drugs like OxyContin, Percocet, Norco, and even non-opiates like Xanax. But lab results show the knockoffs that are killing people often contain little, if any, of those compounds. That's what killed Tyler Cabral, whose oxycodone addiction, fed by doctors trying to treat his pain, evolved, after the prescriptions dried up, into a fentanyl addiction he could satisfy only on the street. Fentanyl is what killed Dylan and Cameron Hart. It's what killed Katie Kokenauer and Andrew Cullers. And it's what killed 33-year-old Brooke Torres of Bakersfield, whose counterfeit Xanax, purchased off the street, contained a fatal dose of the synthetic opioid.
My daughter, she was funny. She was very witty. We were like best friends. We did everything together.
But the tragic succession of events started about 5 years before her death as Brooke drove home from Fresno. The road had disappeared in a winter fog so dense and impenetrable it scared her. The anxiety triggered by that event persisted and persisted to the point where Brooke's doctor prescribed her Paxil, then Xanax. Months later, according to Brooke's mother, Becky Torres, Brooke was still hooked on Xanax and desperate to get off. Finally, a physician she'd met socially suggested 3 alternatives: the opioid painkiller oxycodone, of all things, as well as Norco and bars of Xanax. And as happens all too often, Brooke's use of Oxy turned into yet another addiction.
She was addicted to Oxy, and then we put her into a rehab.
It took Becky's intervention for help to come. Brooke did get off OxyContin, but then there were unintended consequences.
She started buying Oxy off the street, from a drug dealer.
Yeah.
And then he was giving her stuff that was actually Oxy laced with fentanyl.
Yeah.
So in 2018, she actually overdosed at the house, and I was home.
Brooke dashed out the door that day, oddly agitated, telling her mother she needed a fast food taco immediately. Instead, she went to her dealer. When she returned, she was calm, at least at first.
We ended up calling 911 and we rushed her to the hospital.
But a few months later, in September 2019, it happened again. Everyone had flown to Georgia for a family event. Everyone except Brooke, who stayed behind because of her classes at CSUB. That night in Atlanta, the family went to a movie, an action flick. Becky emerged beaming with the euphoric adrenaline of an action-packed film. But then,
I didn't feel right, so something wasn't right. So I called my neighbor and I asked my neighbor if they could go check on Brooke, but she is not coming to the door. So then I just got this really weird feeling. So then I called her back and I said, "Can you call 911 for me?" Anyways, they broke into the back door and they tried, for about 45 minutes trying to, but it was too late.
and now the mother looks for ways to honor the daughter. First, by encouraging the state medical board to scrutinize doctors who prescribed recklessly. Second, by organizing a support group for parents like herself who've lost children to drug overdoses. Missing a piece of my heart overdose loss support group, she calls it.
There's so many parents right now in our community that are really suffering, and it's hard.
These tragedies occurred not just because of the irresponsible behavior of physicians or the ruthless addictiveness of fentanyl, but often because of the carelessness and incompetence of those who work in illicit pill-producing operations. Criminal drug makers mix the ingredients for these counterfeit oxycodone pills in whatever suits the size of their operations, from commercial-sized blenders to ordinary coffee bean grinders, pulverizing their product to the consistency of French roast, and then scooping the mixed powder into pill presses, available to the small-time manufacturer for as little as $15. If they don't blend it thoroughly enough, though, however, the distribution of fentanyl in the pill mixture may be inconsistent, uneven. Some pills may contain almost no fentanyl. Some may contain too much. Those are the ones that kill people. It's not hyperbole to call this a game of Russian roulette. Louis Wright, a former heroin addict turned minister, has seen it play out this way over and over.
There's no consistency. So whereas one guy may, maybe he's smoking a half a pill a day, right? Half a pill a serving or whatever it is, and he's fine. But then he gets another pill and it kills him.
Manufacturing counterfeit fentanyl-laced oxycodone knockoff pills is actually pretty simple if customer safety is not an overriding concern. But in case wannabe drug dealers need tutorials, those are easily discovered on the internet too. Here's one halfway disguised as a Call of Duty video game.
I suggest experimenting heavily with fentanyl because for me, I've had a lot of overdoses. If you keep piling on more additives, which are already toxic, you're going to get a really, really deadly substance on your hands. So when you give it to people, they're going to die, which isn't good for business.
No, not good for business, nor for families. What is the purpose in telling these stories? Just this: a problem that has been emerging gradually over several years across the U.S. is suddenly spreading with ruthless speed and intensity. It's the killer opioid, fentanyl, and it's tearing Kern County families apart, many of whom are learning about this synthetic drug only after it's too late. Illicit fentanyl has been around for years, so why is it so prevalent and so frequently deadly now? I'll have some possible answers next time when we take a deeper dive into the problem of fentanyl, the counterfeit killer. For 17 News, I'm Robert Price.
Fentanyl was a problem before the pandemic.
They're selling death.
Straight fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
He was laying right there on the bed,
Will they kill you? Sure.
This should not have happened.
You know, and it happened to me.
and he was trying to do CPR on him.
We see it more and more.
She was a good kid, but she tried to self-medicate.
There's nothing else you can do, and they said no.
There's ways you can die.
People who are dying from overdoses of fentanyl.
I can't treat you once you're dead. Killing our children.
We have to, as a community, figure this out.
There's a pandemic out there of a type not associated with any kind of virus. Vaccines, social distancing, mask mandates, they're of no value. This is strictly a man-made pandemic, and it's built on profit, addiction, and deception. The agent of death in this pandemic is fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it killed 81,000 Americans between May 2019 and May 2020. In 2020, fentanyl, in combination with other drugs and by itself, killed, according to the coroner's office, at least 125 people in Kern County. That's 2.5 fentanyl overdose deaths per week countywide, 10 a month, throughout a year in which almost all the headlines were devoted to another killer, COVID-19. Perhaps you've heard of fentanyl. Perhaps you recognize it as the poison that killed musicians Prince in 2016 and Tom Petty in 2017, and very nearly killed Demi Lovato in 2018. That makes fentanyl old news, right? Except it's not. It's here now, in Kern County, still, and it's worse than ever. And if it becomes as prevalent here as it is in the northeastern United States, it will get worse still. Last year, 10 western states reported a near doubling of deaths from synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl, from the previous year. And deaths from fentanyl have only accelerated since then. Illegal pill seizures, one major indicator of the depth of the problem, are way up. The Kern County Sheriff's Department, to name one agency involved in the fight against fentanyl, seized 7,800 pills in 2019. In 2020, it seized 65,000, an eightfold increase. Through the first 19 weeks of 2021, the KCSO already has seized more than 70,000 pills, putting it on track to confiscate 190,000, nearly triple 2020's haul. And that number doesn't include the confiscations from a pair of March 26th raids by a multi-jurisdictional task force led by the Federal Department of Homeland Security that resulted in 9 arrests and the seizure of more than 380 pounds of methamphetamine and 8 pounds of fentanyl, the equivalent of 30,000 counterfeit oxy pills. And when seizures rise, deaths do too. Fatal fentanyl overdoses have visited every state and virtually every city, including Bakersfield.
Both my sons died the same way.
In March of last year, Dan Hart lost his 28-year-old son, Dylan. Found him unresponsive in his room. Called 911. It was too late. 9 months later, in December, 4 days after Christmas, incredibly, Hart lost his other son, 23-year-old Cameron. He found Cameron unresponsive in his room. He called 911, and again, it was too late. 2 sons, same year, same drug. Cameron's COVID-delayed funeral was February 2nd. 30 friends attended. Several spoke of his irreverent wit, his love of life, his ability to brighten a room. Dimitri Martfeld was his best friend.
Cam could take anyone sad and turn their day completely around within 30 seconds.
They also spoke of the insidious omnipresence of the drug that took Cameron Hart, and in recent years, others in their group of friends. Cameron's friend, Matthew Hanisch, used his time at the podium to deliver a message.
Well, basically, I just asked everyone to stop doing these drugs. Like, we lost one of my best friends, someone I'm never gonna get back again. Like, someone that could never be replaced. You understand? And his brother died the same way, through the same drug dealer, bought the same drugs.
This is Cameron's father, Danny Hart.
They're selling death out there, and it happens so fast. I've met so many mothers recently that are going through the same thing. It's just mind-boggling how many it's happened to you. How many people got up there and spoke of other friends of Cameron's that died the same way. I just want to see a stop to it. They're selling death.
Martfeld said he had a drug problem too, but got sober 4 years ago and was pushing his best friend to do the same. Cameron told Martfeld's mother he was ready to take that step.
He had told me, "This is my Christmas gift to you. I'm going to get sober. And he hugged me, and I hugged him, and I said, oh, I hope so, Cameron.
Cameron died 5 days later before he could deliver on that promise.
But what he was doing was trying to get into a rehab. He kept crying to me like a week before this happened, saying he knows he's going to die if he doesn't get help. They would take him, they would get back to him by New Year's. They said they would probably have him in by New Year's. And he didn't make it that far.
Another life lost to fentanyl, another family devastated. This one, twice. With one new fentanyl overdose death every 3 days last year in Kern County, maybe the odds of it taking two brothers weren't as astronomical as it might have seemed. Not with a drug as popular, plentiful, and deadly as fentanyl. An incredibly minuscule dose can be fatal. The toxicity of most opioids, drugs like heroin, are measured in milligrams. Fentanyl is so potent, it's sometimes measured in micrograms, 1/1000th of a milligram. And 700 micrograms, about the size of a single grain of salt, can be fatal. This kilo brick of seized fentanyl is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in Bakersfield. Merely touching it can cause, and has caused, a medical emergency. That's why law enforcement officers are required to take special precautions when they handle it. Masks, double gloves. It's so toxic, even the slightest absorption through the skin can cause someone to pass out. Look what it did to this police officer handing seized fentanyl in Bartlesville, Oklahoma last year. He recovered. Bakersfield Police Detective Peter Beagley, who we can't show here because of the undercover nature of his job, says fentanyl's toxicity is matched only by its profitability.
If they buy a kilo of fentanyl, they're able to turn that into $10 to $20 million off of that 1 kilo.
When it's taken in combination with another opioid like heroin or oxycodone, as is often the case with illicitly manufactured counterfeit pills, even the tiniest dose of fentanyl can be fatal. And you can buy some right now, today, on social media platforms like Snapchat, from your friendly neighborhood drug dealer.
So on social media, they'll post what would be kind of their menu. They're pretty blatant about it.
Hey, look at these great deals, like one of those supermarket circulars you get in your mailbox, except this is on your phone, or your kid's phone. We're sharing these painful stories because fentanyl, a chemical cousin of heroin and opium, has arrived in Kern County with widespread ruthlessness, and Kern County families are not prepared. They don't know what it is, where their family members are getting it, or what it can do to them. Families need to grasp the unforgiving finality of a fentanyl overdose now, not after it hits home. Next, the manufacturing process and why there's so much danger associated with the drug. What constitutes a bad batch, and what's in it that's proving so deadly? I'll tell you when I take another look at fentanyl, the counterfeit killer. For 17 News, Robert Price.
Fentanyl was a problem before the pandemic.
They're selling death.
Straight fentanyl.
He was laying right there on the bed.
Will they kill you? Sure.
This should not have happened.
You know, and it happened to me.
And he was trying to do CPR on him.
We see it more and more.
She was a good kid, but she tried to self-medicate.
There's nothing else you can do, and they said no.
There's ways you can die.
People who are dying from overdoses of fentanyl.
I can't treat you once you're dead. Killing our children.
We have to, as a community, figure this out.
It was February 19th, 2020. Katie Kokenauer walked into a restroom a few steps down the hall from Aspire Behavioral Health, her counseling program, and she locked the door. She did not walk out. Locked inside, she pulled out a small sheet of aluminum foil, laid a crushed blue pill on top, heated it from the bottom with a cigarette lighter, brought a cut-off plastic straw to her lips and leaned in, slowly inhaling the swirling, smoky vapor. Chasing the dragon, it's called. Yes, a pill. Counterfeit oxycodone. Active ingredient, fentanyl. A lethal substance manufactured, in this case, not under sterile, pharmacologically rigorous conditions, but most likely in the kitchen or garage of an illicit drug operation in LA or in Mexico. And as happened with 124 other people in Kern County last year, most of them under 30 and white, it killed her. Katie Kokenauer, just 18 years old, was no hardened crackhead, no addled drug addict.
Oh, she was really pretty. I loved her freckles, and she had like the brightest eyes. And she had pale skin, but it looked like porcelain, so it looked super cute with the freckles. I loved it. And a cute little button nose.
Corinne Ingstrad said Katie Kokenauer was her twin flame, close friends, sometimes too much alike.
Very, very loud, would want to make friends with everybody. Super funny. She could make me laugh so hard I would get the hiccups.
And now, February 19th, 2021, a year later, some of Katie's friends and relatives have gathered in a West Bakersfield park to send her their personal messages, scribbled on helium balloons, purple balloons, her favorite color.
Where are they going?
They're going to heaven to Katie.
Magda Brocaire was one of the people there. Katie had lived for a time at Brocaire's sober living home, Amethyst, and now Brocaire wanted to not only honor Katie's memory, she wanted to make an impression on 2 of her current charges at Amethyst.
I like having them come to something like this so they can see how it affects the families and see how absolutely real it is too. Because that's something in somebody's addiction, they're not thinking about that. You know, and seeing the mom, seeing the grandma still completely so brokenhearted, you know, and I don't think that ever goes away.
Katie's mother, Casey Jackson, still can't quite let her daughter go. She spoke to her in a special way on Katie's birthday last year, the first since her passing, delivering 1,800 ladybugs to friends and family members who simultaneously at dusk sent them flying into the San Joaquin Valley sky. That's one way Jackson copes. This is another. She's trying to be there for other parents who've lost children to fentanyl.
I'm trying to bring awareness so other families don't go through what I have. I've already met 7 or 8 families just this year. And they're going through the same thing. It's awful. I just want it to stop.
Making that happen will be a challenge, a significant challenge. Katie immersed herself in a culture that, according to her friend Ingstrad, is expanding.
People aren't learning, you know, and I think it's starting to be introduced more into high school kids. I feel like it's definitely within the past few years. I've only been graduated for like a year and a half, but like looking at like girls that are freshmen now and talking about it, and 15, 16-year-olds, like even 5 years ago, like it's different, like how much drugs have changed.
Still, the questions, the nagging questions. For starters, how does an 18-year-old get her hands on counterfeit oxycodone, fentanyl pills? Answer: with that handy little ubiquitous device most of us carry around like extra appendages, the cell phone. Many of those fentanyl deaths, 125 last year, according to the county coroner's office, were facilitated through social media, primarily Snapchat, and cheery little advertisements like this one. How do you fight social media postings like that? How about with more social media? I'll introduce you next to another Bakersfield mother who hopes to heal herself and her family in precisely that way as they and a growing number of U.S. families deal with this scourge. That's why we're telling these stories, because families that have suffered the profound loss of a child, a sibling, a friend, don't always, until it's too late, grasp the cruel tenacity of fentanyl, a synthetic cousin of heroin and opium that has already ravaged other areas of the country and is now in Kern County, where it's a common and deadly additive in a wide range of street drugs. It's well past time to shine a bright, revealing light on fentanyl, the counterfeit killer. For 17 News, Robert Price.
Fentanyl was a problem before the pandemic.
They're selling death.
Straight fentanyl.
He was laying right there on the bed.
Will they kill you? Sure.
This should not have happened.
You know, and it happened to me.
And he was trying to do CPR on him.
We see it more and more.
She was a good kid, but she tried to self-medicate.
There's nothing else you can do, and they said no.
There's ways you can die.
People who are dying from overdoses of fentanyl.
I can't treat you once you're dead. Killing our children.
We have to, as a community, figure this out.
Why is a common question among the parents and family members of people lost to America's illicit drug du jour, the powerful opioid fentanyl. Answers are hard to come by. Harder still is figuring out what to do about it. Carrie Walker is one of those parents, but she has decided on a path forward. Her eldest son, Alexander Cullors, died of an opioid overdose in July 2014 at the age of 18. He'd taken some prescription oxycodone from his girlfriend's grandmother's medicine cabinet.
Rambunctious, crazy, always had a lot of energy, but the most loving kid you've ever met. But like I said, he suffered anxiety, depression, fought that a lot of his life.
Losing a son would devastate any mother. But then in April 2019, Walker's other son, Andrew Cullors, by then 18 himself, died of an overdose too. In his case, fentanyl, counterfeit oxy.
Losing one child to it, your fear of losing another child, I mean, it's just great. So with Andrew, it was like, you know, I educated him. You know, I educated him, and we talked about it. You know, there were times like I caught him smoking pot, and I sat down with him and cried and said, I cannot lose another child. I won't survive it. You know, and I would never try opiates. I would never do, you know, I would never try those. I know what they do.
Then one night, he didn't come home. His friend found him in his car in Arvin, where he'd been parked at a gas station for 2 days, somehow undetected. Walker seized upon the only survival strategy she could think of, educating others. She has started a nonprofit called Steps of Change, a Facebook-based organization that has morphed from the school assembly speech circuit into what she thinks it really needs to be, a place for referrals, support, networking.
I don't know how many times I hear you're strong, it's amazing what you do, you're going to touch lives, you're going to change lives, you're going to do amazing things, you know.
Are you strong?
No. That's the easy thing to say, you know, the easy for them to say, because what else are you going to say? You lost 2 children, what do they say to you, you know? There's nothing you can say, but you're so strong, you know. And I do what I do, anger, I mean, a lot of it, you know, there's different emotions in it, but a lot of it's anger. It's like, I mean, our children, it's killing our children.
But she found strength in the strength of others like Louis Wright, a one-time heroin addict turned minister. He runs One Door Recovery, one of the very few, now perhaps the only, opioid detox centers in Bakersfield. And he's seeing something now in the rising threat of fentanyl he hasn't seen before. Fentanyl is showing up in everything, including non-opiates.
A lot of the fentanyl that's coming in is coming in, you know, Asia, the cartel, you know, Mexico, and it's a lot cheaper for them to use fentanyl than it is to go through, you know, the opium, the harvesting, all the stuff that goes into it. It's pretty rare to find, you know, heroin today that's truly heroin.
Since becoming a minister nearly a decade ago, Wright has presided over dozens of funerals, and only one of them, he said, one, was for a natural causes death. The rest have been drug-related.
This is the problem that we're seeing. Methamphetamine, cocaine, will they kill you? Sure. Heroin, today, I mean, it's gonna kill you. It's like Russian roulette every time you use it.
Thanks to the pervasive presence of fentanyl, the fear of instant death now applies to every drug on the street.
Fentanyl's a really, really high.
Inside a small downtown Bakersfield sandwich shop, I sat across the table from a drug addict, a user of crystal meth. That's a non-opioid stimulant. We used a special test strip to determine whether fentanyl was present in the dose he was preparing to inject. 2 red lines means no fentanyl detected. 1 red line means it's there.
That says it is fentanyl.
This addict said he would shoot up his full regular dose anyway. He would just, as advised, make sure he had a friend with him and a dose of the opioid overdose antidote, Narcan, close at hand. There's not enough Narcan to go around, common though it might be now. America will knock back this fentanyl crisis only with education and reasoned, thoughtful enforcement.
The person who actually sells.
John Hart of Bakersfield, who lost 2 nephews, Dylan and Cameron Hart, just 9 months apart last year, says legislation that increases penalties for street dealers is a big part of the answer.
What I'm urging my brother and the group that he's involved with to do is, instead of trying to pressure the police, whose hands are tied by the existing laws, to direct their efforts at the state legislature and see if we can get ourselves to the point where they can toughen up those laws so that not only the big dealers pay the price, but also the street dealers.
Kern County District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer notes that fentanyl overdose deaths in 2020 nearly equaled the record number of local homicides last year, 140. And she agrees. State sentencing laws need to be toughened up. But she also says parents must be made aware of the danger, and she aims to do that.
Well, when kids come back to school in the fall, because they're at home now, we want to do a push to make sure parents know about fentanyl. Sometimes kids think they're buying ecstasy or Xanax or some of the other drugs, and it's not, it's fentanyl. And so it can be very, very deadly.
Legislation was, in fact, in the pipeline, but it took a different tack. State Senator Melissa Melendez, a Republican from Riverside County, tried to push through a bill this spring that would treat repeat fentanyl dealers who kill like repeat DUI drivers who kill. It failed, but she's not giving up on the issue.
We are considering options because obviously we didn't have much success in the committee hearing. So there is an option of doing a ballot measure, perhaps where we would let the voters decide if this is how they want to handle this. You know, we haven't made a decision yet, but we're looking because it's that important. There's too many people. We had over 2 hours of testimony of people who had lost a loved one from this drug, and I just can't, you know, in good conscience stand by and just do nothing.
And now, as deadly as fentanyl has proven to be, a more deadly chemical cousin looms on the horizon. Carfentanil, a structural analog of fentanyl, is starting to show up in street drugs, and it's 100 times more likely to kill than fentanyl. Carfentanil has only 2 legitimate applications: as a tranquilizing agent for elephants, and theoretically in military operations. Banned under the International Chemical Weapons Convention, Carfentanil was used most infamously during the 2002 Moscow Opera House hostage crisis, when Chechen rebels seized the packed Dubrovka Theater. The Russian military, in an attempt to incapacitate the 40 terrorists, pumped in aerosolized carfentanil. It killed 120 of the 850 Russian hostages. Some have likened its potency to nerve gas. And now it's coming to the streets of Bakersfield, disguised cruelly again as oxycodone. Hillcrest Cemetery has a special significance for Carrie Walker. Her boys are here, Alex and Andrew, born 7 years apart, but 18 now, both of them, forever, buried in the same plot, having suffered the same fate. A fate that might not have befallen them if not for a man-made pandemic built on profit, addiction, and deception. That's why we're telling these stories, because fentanyl is not an ordinary drug. It is not the sort of manageable high your son or daughter might think it is, in part because they may not even know what they're taking. We're telling these stories so families can talk to each other about the reality of fentanyl, about the finality of fentanyl, now, while it's still possible to have those conversations. The lethal synthetic cousin of prescription opioids that continues to make its presence known in cemeteries across the land, fentanyl, is not slowing. It's gaining momentum, even morphing into forms more diabolical yet. And unless some combination of education, legislation, and communication takes hold soon, the coronavirus outbreak will not be the only health tragedy of this moment in time that we'll look back on a generation from now with dismay and regret. For 17 News, I'm Robert Price.